Hey there, and welcome to Dark Creaky TV. If you're new, hit that subscribe button for spine-tingling Reddit creepypasta stories that are perfect for a night of chilling thrills. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and let's get into tonight's stories. I played with a Ouija board alone. Now it won't stop following me. Okay, so before I even get into this, let me just say, I know how stupid it was. I see all these people online playing with Ouija boards, and you always think, yeah, this is creepy, but it's all fake, right? That's what I thought. I mean, we've all seen those videos of people playing with them and freaking out when the planchette moves. But being the overconfident idiot that I am, I thought, hey, what's the worst that could happen? Famous last words. So, a few weeks ago, I was home alone for the weekend. My roommate, Jake, had gone to visit his family, and I was just chilling, bored out of my mind. I'm not a party animal, not a fan of going out much, so I spent most of that Friday night scrolling through YouTube and Reddit. You know how it is. At some point, I fell down the rabbit hole of paranormal videos, like people telling ghost stories, exploring abandoned places, and of course messing around with Ouija boards. It's always funny to watch other people get spooked. You're sitting there, safe behind your screen, thinking, why are they freaking out? They're just moving it themselves. But the more I watched, the more curious I got. I'd never used one myself, and I thought, why not? I didn't even have a real board, just this app I downloaded on my phone. It had decent reviews, with people saying they got legit responses, and I thought it could be fun. Like, what harm could a phone app do, right? I decided to give it a shot. I sat on my bed, lights off, the glow from my screen lighting up my room. For the sake of atmosphere, I turned on some quiet, creepy background music, the kind you hear in those ghost hunting shows. I wasn't expecting much, honestly, but I figured I'd go through the motions. I opened the app. The screen looked like a traditional Ouija board, complete with the letters AZ, numbers, and the words yes, no, and goodbye at the bottom. A virtual planchette floated in the middle. I figured I'd ask something simple at first, just to test it out. Is there anyone here with me? I typed, feeling like a complete idiot. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, the planchette started to move. I was sure it was just some scripted part of the app, to make it seem legit. It slowly dragged over to yes. I laughed it off, but a part of me felt a little weird. I mean, it was just an app, right? But I kept going, figuring I'd try something more direct. What's your name? I typed. Again, the planchette moved. It hovered over the letters, slowly spelling out a name. Dennis. I paused. Dennis? Really? What kind of ghost has a name like Dennis? I was expecting something a little more ominous, like Beelzebub or Azazel. But Dennis? It made me feel like the app was just messing with me, trying to be creepy in a low-budget horror movie kind of way. I asked a few more questions. Where Dennis was from, how old he was, if he had died in a tragic accident. The responses were vague, like the kind of stuff you'd get if you were trying to generate a spooky backstory on the fly. I was losing interest fast. At this point, I was about to close the app and call it a night, when I asked one final question, more as a joke than anything. Do you want to hurt me? The planchette shot straight to yes. Okay, I'll admit, that freaked me out a little. It wasn't the answer itself, it was how fast it moved. Every other time, it had been slow and clunky, but this, it was like it couldn't get to yes fast enough. I actually dropped my phone for a second, but then I laughed it off. It's a phone app, for crying out loud. I typed in goodbye, just to be safe, because that's what you're supposed to do, right? Closed the app and went to bed, thinking nothing more of it. But that's when things started getting weird. When I woke up the next morning, my phone was dead. Now this might not sound like a big deal, but I distinctly remember plugging it in before going to bed. It was at 50% battery when I closed the Ouija app, so there's no way it should have drained overnight. I shrugged it off. figuring the charger must have come loose or something. But the weirdness didn't stop there. Throughout the day, I kept noticing these strange glitches on my phone, like random apps opening by themselves, my music pausing and starting again without me touching anything. At first, I thought it was a bug, or maybe even a virus from some sketchy site I'd visited. I mean, let's be real, we've all clicked on those shady links at some point. It was later that night when things took a turn for the worse. I was lying in bed, scrolling through Reddit like I usually do before passing out, when my phone screen flickered. At first, I thought it was nothing, just another glitch. But then the Ouija app opened by itself. I hadn't touched it since the night before, hadn't even thought about it. But there it was, the board glowing dimly on my screen. The planchette sitting in the middle like it had been waiting for me. I tried closing it, but the app wouldn't shut off. No matter how many times I pressed the home button, it stayed open, the planchette twitching like it was eager. My heart started racing, but I told myself it was just a tech issue. I went into my settings, figuring I'd just delete the damn app. But before I could, the planchette moved. It slid slowly, deliberately across the board, spelling out one word, FOLLOW. I stared at the screen, not really understanding what it meant. Follow? Like on social media? Or was it something more sinister? Before I could think too hard about it, my phone died again. This time, though, it was different, because when the screen went black, I saw something in the reflection, behind me, standing in the corner of my room, just out of the reach of the light. Something that shouldn't have been there. I froze. I didn't want to turn around. I mean, would you? My brain was screaming at me, every instinct telling me not to look. I don't know if it was pure fear or some weird survival mechanism kicking in, but I just couldn't move. My heart was hammering in my chest, and I could hear it thudding in my ears. The longer I stared at the black screen of my phone, the more I started to make out what I was seeing. There was definitely something in the reflection. A shape, tall and dark, standing in the corner of my room by the door. My mind was racing, trying to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe it was just a shadow, or something from outside. But the more I looked, the more I realized it wasn't either of those things, because it was moving, not like walking or anything, but it was shifting slightly, like it was breathing, slowly, deeply. It felt like whatever it was watching me. And that was when I got hit with this overwhelming sensation of being hunted, like something was waiting for me to acknowledge it, daring me to turn around and face it. I've never felt fear like that in my life. It was this primal, gut-wrenching terror that made every hair on my body stand up. You ever hear people talk about fight or flight? Yeah, well, my body went into a whole different mode, freeze, like a deer in the headlights. I couldn't look away from the phone, couldn't bring myself to move. Then, in the reflection, the thing in the corner took a step forward. I don't know what snapped me out of it, but somehow I found the strength to launch myself out of bed. I grabbed my phone and bolted into the hallway, slamming my bedroom door shut behind me. I stood there in the darkness of the hallway, panting, clutching my dead phone like it was some kind of lifeline. I didn't hear anything inside my room. No footsteps, no movement, nothing. For a few minutes, I just stood there, listening, trying to get my breathing under control. My hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped my phone. Eventually, I convinced myself that it was just my imagination, that I was freaking myself out over nothing. After all, what could actually be in my room? I was alone. Jake wouldn't be back until Sunday. I tried to calm down, thinking it had to be a trick of the light. Or maybe I was just tired. You know, your brain does weird stuff when you're sleep deprived. But I wasn't about to go back in there just yet. Not after seeing whatever the hell that was. Instead, I went to the living room, turned on every light I could, and sat down on the couch. I tried turning my phone back on, but it was completely dead. No matter what I did, it wouldn't power up. So I just sat there, staring at the blank screen, my mind running wild with all the creepy thoughts I'd been trying to push away. That's when I heard the first noise. It was faint, like something shifting in my room. A soft creak, followed by what sounded like a whisper. I couldn't make out what it was saying. It was too quiet, but it was there. I know it sounds crazy, but I swear I wasn't imagining it. It was this low, hissing sound, like someone was trying to speak without really wanting me to hear. I stood up. Every muscle in my body tensed. I wanted to leave. My mind was screaming at me to get out of the apartment, just run and figure it out later. But I didn't. Something kept me rooted there. Some twisted sense of curiosity, or maybe denial. I couldn't just leave, could I? It was probably nothing, just my mind playing tricks on me. But then, the whispering got louder. It wasn't coming from my room anymore. It was coming from the hallway. At that point, I was done pretending I wasn't scared. My heart was practically in my throat as I backed up toward the front door. But before I could even grab the handle, the whispering stopped. Dead silence. It was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the distant sound of cars on the street outside. I didn't dare move. I stood there, staring at the hallway, waiting for something to happen. And then, from behind my closed bedroom door, I heard a soft knock, 3 slow, deliberate taps. I thought I was going to throw up. My stomach dropped and my hands started to sweat. I was shaking so badly, I could barely keep my grip on the door handle. I wanted to scream, to run, to do something, but I couldn't. I was stuck in place, paralyzed by this overwhelming sense of dread. Then I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. This time it was louder, like whatever was on the other side wanted me to come back, like it was inviting me to open the door and see what was waiting for me. I wasn't about to do that. In a blind panic, I grabbed my keys off the table and bolted out of the apartment. I didn't even bother locking the door behind me. I just needed to get out. My feet hit the pavement, and I didn't stop running until I was 2 blocks away, panting, drenched in sweat, and completely freaked out. I ended up crashing at my friend Sam's place that night. I told him something freaky had happened, and I just didn't want to be alone. But I left out the part about the Ouija board app. I mean, who was going to believe me? It was an app. How could that be dangerous? But as I lay there on his couch, trying to calm myself down, something occurred to me. I hadn't heard a knock on my bedroom door. Not really. It had come from the other side of the room, from inside the room. When I woke up at Sam's place the next morning, I convinced myself it was over. I mean, how could it not be? I'd left the apartment, didn't touch the Ouija app again, and spent the night surrounded by people instead of alone. The whole thing felt like a bad dream. One of those late-night anxiety spirals where you get yourself worked up over nothing. That's what I told myself anyway. But the truth was, I couldn't shake that feeling. You know the one, where your brain's trying to forget something, but it's always there, lurking in the back of your mind, just waiting for the quiet moments to crawl back out. I felt like I was being watched, constantly. Even at Sam's, I found myself glancing over my shoulder every few minutes, expecting to see something. But every time I looked, there was nothing. Still, I wasn't ready to go back to my apartment. I stalled, spending the rest of the weekend hanging out with friends and finding excuses not to be alone. I didn't tell anyone the full story. No way was I going to sound like a lunatic telling them I'd been haunted by some stupid Ouija app. And honestly, I didn't believe it myself. I kept thinking I'd just been spooked, that my mind was playing tricks on me, and that maybe I was just really, really sleep deprived. But then Sunday night came, and I had to face the music. Jake was coming back that night, and I knew I couldn't stay away forever. So I braced myself, went back to the apartment, and prepared to act like nothing weird had ever happened. When I walked in, everything looked the same. No creepy shadows in the corners, no weird noises, no signs that anything had changed. I almost laughed at myself for being so freaked out. I mean, the place felt normal. Too normal, if that makes sense. The air was heavy, like the apartment had been holding its breath while I was gone. I chalked it up to being on edge and decided to just get through the night, put the whole thing behind me. Jake came home a little later, and the fact that someone else was around made me feel better. Safety in numbers, right? But that feeling of relief didn't last long. Later that night, Jake crashed out early after his long trip. I stayed up, trying to keep myself busy, Netflix, scrolling through Reddit, whatever I could do to keep my mind off things. I was determined not to think about the Ouija board. But the second I let my guard down, that nagging thought crept back into my head. What if it wasn't just in my head? Around midnight, my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced down, expecting it to be some random notification, but what I saw made my heart sink. The Ouija app had reinstalled itself. I know what you're thinking. No way, right? But I swear on everything I had deleted it. I know I deleted it. The icon was just sitting there on my home screen, like it had never left. I stared at it, feeling that cold, creeping fear start to crawl back into my chest. My finger hovered over the screen, trembling, like part of me wanted to open it. But the smarter part of me knew better. That's when the phone buzzed again. A new notification. Dennis wants to play. I'm not kidding. That's what it said. I felt my blood turn to ice as I read the message. I didn't even know this app could send notifications like that. I stared at it, hoping it was some kind of prank or glitch, but nothing about it felt like a joke. And then, right as I was about to delete the app again, my phone rang. The screen lit up, and for a split second, I felt a rush of relief, thinking it was a friend or maybe even Jake calling from his room. But the caller ID said unknown. I almost didn't answer it. I wanted to throw my phone across the room, honestly. But some part of me, maybe it was morbid curiosity, made me swipe to accept the call. I held the phone up to my ear, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything at first. And then, from the other end, a voice whispered, "I see you." I dropped the phone, like I literally threw it across the couch. My hands were shaking, and I felt this overwhelming sense of panic, like someone had just walked up behind me and whispered directly into my ear. I bolted upright, my eyes scanning the room, half expecting to see, I don't even know, someone, something. But the room was empty, silent. I could hear Jake snoring in his room down the hall. Everything seemed normal, except for the fact that my phone was still lit up on the couch, the call still connected. I grabbed the phone with shaking hands, pressed the end call button, and stared at the screen, half expecting it to ring again. But it didn't. The app was still there though, like it was waiting for me to open it. I don't know why I did it, I honestly don't. It's like something was compelling me to. I tapped the app and it opened back to the board, just like before. The planchette was already in the middle, but it didn't move right away. I stared at it, my mind racing, waiting for something, anything to happen. And then, just like that, the planchette began to move. Slowly, it spelled out FINDME. I slammed the phone shut, my breathing shallow. Find me? What the hell did that mean? My mind was racing. Was this some kind of sick joke? Was someone screwing with me? I couldn't make sense of it. But then, the noise started again. That faint whispering. It wasn't coming from my phone this time. It was coming from the hallway, just outside Jake's door. I froze, listening. My throat went dry as I realized it was getting louder, clearer, and this time I could understand what it was saying. Come here! I wasn't imagining it. There was someone or something in the apartment with us. My legs felt like lead as I stood up, inching toward the hallway, my pulse racing. I could feel my stomach churning with every step. I didn't want to see what was there, but I had to know. As I reached Jake's door, I noticed something strange. The door, which had been closed, was now slightly ajar. Just a crack. I could hear his heavy breathing from inside, and for a second I thought about waking him up, but something in my gut told me not to. I pushed the door open slowly, peering inside. The room was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the streetlight outside. Jake was sprawled out on his bed, fast asleep, and standing at the foot of his bed was Dennis. Not a person, not a man, but something, a tall, shadowy figure, barely visible in the dim light, with these long, unnaturally thin limbs. Its head was cocked to the side, as if it was watching Jake, studying him. Its back was turned to me, but I could feel its presence, this suffocating aura of dread filling the room. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just stood there, frozen, watching as this thing stood over my friend, completely unaware of my presence. And then, without turning around, it whispered again, "You're next." I don't remember how I got out of Jake's room. 1 second, I was standing there, staring at that thing hovering over his bed. And the next, I was in the hallway, gasping for air. My hands were cold, slick with sweat, and my mind was racing. I wanted to wake Jake up, grab him, get the hell out of there, but something told me not to. Maybe it was the way Dennis, or whatever it was, had moved. The way it stood there, looming over him, almost like it had been expecting me. Like it knew I was there, but hadn't turned around, because it didn't need to. It didn't care that I was watching, because it was already playing with me. The thought made my skin crawl. I ran into the living room, slammed my back against the wall, and tried to breathe. My phone was still on the couch where I'd left it, the screen black now. No more notifications, no more creepy messages. But I knew it wasn't over. It wouldn't be that easy. There was something in the apartment, and it wanted me. For a few minutes I stood there just listening. The air was heavy, suffocatingly still. I could still hear Jake's soft snores coming from his room. But there was nothing else. No footsteps, no whispers, no signs of movement. But I knew. I could feel it. That thing was still in there, lurking, waiting for me to make the wrong move. I don't know what came over me, but I had this overwhelming urge to leave the apartment, get outside, find a place where I could think. But I didn't want to make any noise. Whatever was in here, it was playing with me, and I didn't want to give it a reason to follow me again. I slipped on my shoes, grabbed my keys, and quietly opened the door to the hallway outside. As I stepped out, I glanced over my shoulder one last time, back toward Jake's room. The door was still cracked open, just like I'd left it. I didn't see anything inside. No shadows, no movement. But that didn't comfort me. Not really. I didn't take the elevator. I didn't want to be trapped in a tiny metal box, waiting for the doors to open, knowing that whatever was in the apartment could be right behind me. Instead, I took the stairs, practically tripping over my own feet as I bolted down all 4 flights to the lobby. When I finally made it outside, I felt this wave of relief wash over me. The cool night air hit my face, and for the first time in what felt like hours, I could breathe. I stood there on the sidewalk, doubled over, hands on my knees, trying to get my heartbeat back to normal. That's when I made my first big mistake. I pulled out my phone. It sounds ridiculous, but at that moment, all I wanted was some kind of explanation. I didn't care if it was insane. I needed to know what was going on, what I was dealing with. I needed answers. My phone powered on, the screen flickering to life. For a few seconds, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. No weird glitches, no creepy messages. I scrolled through my apps, half expecting to see the Ouija board icon staring back at me, but it wasn't there. For a brief moment, I thought maybe I was in the clear. Maybe leaving the apartment had broken whatever this was. But as I was about to close my phone, the screen glitched, just for a second. And then the app reappeared. It didn't even give me a chance to react before it opened on its own. The virtual board lit up on my screen, the planchette resting in the middle like it had been waiting for me to return. I tried to close it, but the home button wouldn't respond. My phone was locked, trapped in the app, and no matter how many times I tried, it wouldn't let me out. The planchette started moving. Faster. I stared at the word, not understanding. Faster? What did that mean? I was about to throw my phone in frustration when it buzzed in my hand. A message appeared across the board. "It's coming for you." I froze. My blood turned cold. I spun around, half expecting to see it standing behind me, but the street was empty. Just rows of parked cars and dim streetlights. There was no one around, no sign of movement. But the message on my phone hadn't changed. "It's coming for you." I ran. I didn't know where I was going. I just ran. I turned off my phone and stuffed it into my pocket, hoping that somehow, if I didn't look at the screen, the app would stop, that this thing would stop. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't. It wasn't just my phone anymore. It was real. I kept running, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my legs burning from the effort. I didn't stop until I found myself outside a 24-hour diner. The place was empty, except for one guy at the counter and the tired waitress cleaning tables. I burst in, stumbling toward the back booth, trying to calm myself down. The waitress gave me a weird look, but she didn't say anything. I must have looked like a wreck. I sat there, staring at my phone. It was still off, but that didn't matter anymore, did it? I knew the moment I turned it on, the app would still be there, waiting for me. That's when I remembered. The voice had said, "Find me." I didn't want to find it, whatever it was, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't have a choice anymore. This wasn't something I could just ignore, wasn't something that would go away if I deleted the app or threw my phone in the river. It was out there, somewhere, and it was playing a game I didn't understand. The waitress came over to take my order, but I barely heard her. I was too busy staring at the phone, my mind racing. And then, without even thinking, I reached for it and powered it back on. The screen flickered to life. For a few seconds, nothing happened. No app, no messages, just the home screen, perfectly normal. But then, just as I was about to relax, my phone buzzed. A new notification. Look outside. I felt my heart stop. I didn't want to. I really didn't. But some invisible force seemed to pull me toward the window. Slowly, I turned my head, my breath catching in my throat. Outside, under the dim glow of the streetlight, was Dennis. That same tall, thin, shadowy figure, standing on the sidewalk. Its face, or where its face should have been, was turned directly toward me, though I couldn't make out any features. It didn't move. It didn't need to. It just stood there, staring through the window, its presence enough to send every instinct in my body into overdrive. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. It was like my body was glued to the seat, paralyzed by fear. My phone buzzed again, but I didn't need to look. I knew what it said. Come closer. The shadow took one slow step toward the diner. My throat felt tight, like I couldn't breathe. My eyes were locked on Dennis, on that shadow, standing there under the sickly glow of the streetlight. The world seemed to close in around me, the diner fading into the background, the low hum of the air conditioning turning into a distant buzz. All I could see was that shape, slowly advancing toward me. The thing didn't walk like a person. It glided, unnaturally smooth, like it wasn't constrained by the same laws of physics that govern the rest of us. The closer it got, the more the fear rose in my chest, like someone had grabbed my lungs and squeezed them tight. My body screamed at me to run, to get up and bolt out of the back door, but I couldn't. I couldn't move. I couldn't even look away. My phone buzzed again in my hand. Without thinking, I glanced down at the screen. It's inside. A cold chill shot down my spine. I looked up, my eyes darting around the diner. Everything was the same. The tired waitress was still wiping down the counter. The one guy at the bar was sipping coffee, his back to me. The door hadn't opened. There was no bell ringing, no footsteps, but I knew. Dennis was no longer outside. I felt it, the air around me shifting, growing colder, thicker. That oppressive, suffocating presence I'd felt back at the apartment was here, filling the space, pressing in on me from all sides. Slowly, I turned my head to the right, looking toward the window again. There, sitting in the booth across from me, was Dennis. I couldn't see its face, not really. The shape was human but wrong. Too tall, too thin. Its limbs too long, bending in ways that didn't make sense. Its head was tilted toward me, as though it were studying me. The dark space where its eyes should have been boring into mine. My body was screaming at me to run, but it felt like I was stuck, trapped in a nightmare where my legs wouldn't work, where no matter how hard I tried to scream, no sound would come out. Dennis didn't move at first. It just sat there, watching me. The seconds felt like hours, every heartbeat pounding in my ears, the weight of its presence pressing down on my chest. Then, slowly, it leaned forward, its long fingers curling over the edge of the table, the joints cracking as it moved. I squeezed my phone in my hand, desperate for anything, any way to stop this. But I knew I couldn't. There was no closing the app, no deleting it, no getting rid of this thing. It was here, and it wasn't going anywhere. That's when the whisper came again, that same voice that had echoed through my apartment, through my phone. Let's finish the game. I could barely process what it said, my mind reeling. Finish the game? What game? I hadn't agreed to anything. This had all started as some stupid joke, some ridiculous idea I'd had on a boring night. I hadn't asked for this. I didn't want to play. But it wasn't asking. It was telling me. I watched as Dennis raised one hand, its long fingers stretching out toward me, inching closer across the table. It was so close, I could feel the cold radiating off of it, this unnatural chill that made my skin prickle. My muscles tensed, my heart beating so fast it felt like it might burst out of my chest. In a last, desperate move, I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed my phone and opened the app. The board flickered to life on the screen, the letters and numbers glowing softly in the darkness of the diner. The planchette was already in the middle, and without hesitation, I typed the only word I could think of: goodbye. Nothing happened. The planchette didn't move. The board stayed lit, and Dennis didn't disappear. If anything, it seemed to grow darker, its form becoming more defined, more solid. It was still reaching toward me, its hand now inches from mine, so close I could feel that icy cold crawling across my skin. "You don't get to leave yet," it whispered. Panic surged through me. My mind raced, but I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. The app, the damn app. I'd opened it, but the rules weren't working. I had to do something else. I had to stop this thing, end this nightmare. My fingers trembled as I typed again, the letters shaking on the screen. "What do you want?" The planchette moved. Slowly, deliberately, it spelled out one word. Y-O-U. My heart sank. I stared at the word, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. My brain was screaming at me to run, to get out of there, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were made of lead, my chest tight with fear. Dennis leaned closer, its fingers brushing the table now, the cold seeping into the wood. Its head tilted further, almost curiously, like it was waiting for something. I tried again, desperately typing, my vision blurring with panic. Why me? The planchette moved faster this time, sliding across the board with unnatural speed. The letters appeared, one by one, the message clear. "You called." My stomach dropped. I'd invited it. I'd opened the door, and now it wasn't leaving. Dennis's hand was almost on mine now, the cold seeping into my skin, freezing me in place. My fingers twitched, still holding the phone, still staring at the board, desperate for a way out. And then, in one final desperate move, I typed the only thing left to say: goodbye. The screen flickered. The planchette moved. This time, it slid across the board to the word goodbye, hovering there for just a moment before everything went black. The app closed, my phone shutting off completely, the screen going dark in my hand. I looked up. Dennis was gone. The booth across from me was empty, the air no longer cold. The diner was silent. The hum of the refrigerator and the soft murmur of the man at the counter returning to my ears like someone had flipped a switch. I sat there for a long time, trying to understand what had just happened. My body still shaking, my mind numb. I didn't move, didn't dare touch my phone, afraid that somehow, if I did, it would all start again. Eventually, I stood up. I left the diner, my legs barely able to hold me up, and I started walking, putting as much distance between me and that place as possible. I haven't touched a Ouija board since. I haven't touched that app either. But sometimes, when I'm alone, late at night, I still hear the whispers, and every time my phone buzzes, I wonder if it's him again, waiting for me to make the next move. We asked the Ouija board about the future. It told us something we weren't supposed to know. All right, so I need to get this off my chest. This has been bugging me for weeks, and I don't know who else to tell. You ever do something that seems harmless at the time, like a joke or a game, but afterward, it sticks with you, like you can't stop thinking about it, and the more you think about it, the more unsettling it becomes. Yeah, that's exactly what happened to me and my friends. It all started on a random Friday night at my buddy Kyle's place. There were 4 of us, me, Ben, Kyle, Jess, and Alex. We're not exactly the horror movie junkie type of group, more like the Netflix and snacks kind. But we got bored of scrolling through options, so naturally, Kyle suggests something different. "Guys, let's mess around with the Ouija board," he said, half joking, holding up this dusty old board he found in his attic. I'm not gonna lie, I laughed at first. I mean, it felt like something straight out of a bad horror movie. But Jess, of course, was all in, saying stuff like, "It's just a game. What's the worst that could happen?" So, peer pressure and a few beers later, we all sit around Kyle's coffee table with this ancient piece of cardboard and plastic, trying to summon spirits or whatever. Now, a quick side note, I'm not superstitious or anything. I don't believe in ghosts, demons, or any of that. But there's something about a Ouija board that just feels wrong. Like deep down, you know it's not something you should be messing with, even if it's just for fun. But that night, it didn't matter. We were in the mood to screw around and see what would happen. We dimmed the lights, set the mood. Because obviously if you're going to do this, you got to do it right. And we all put our fingers on the planchette. "Is there anyone here with us?" Jess asked dramatically, like she was auditioning for some paranormal TV show. At first, nothing happened. Typical. The planchette sat there in the middle of the board, totally still. I was about to crack a joke when, suddenly, it moved. Like, not just a little twitch. It slid. Just a tiny bit, but it moved. "All right, which one of you is doing that?" Kyle laughed, looking at Alex, because honestly, it seemed like something he'd do. But Alex swore up and down it wasn't him, and Jess gave him the death glare she reserves for when he's screwing with her. I kept quiet, but in my head, I figured it had to be someone messing around. No way a board game was actually doing anything. Jess tried again, her voice a little shakier this time. "What's your name?" The planchette started sliding across the board, letter by letter. We all leaned in closer, watching as it spelled out M-A-R-I. "Marie?" Jess said, confused. "Is your name Marie?" The planchette moved to yes. My stomach dropped a little. I could tell Jess was trying to keep it together, but something about that felt off. "Okay, Marie," Kyle said, probably just trying to keep things light. "What do you want to tell us?" The planchette started moving again, this time faster, way faster. It spelled out 2 words, "Ask Future." I don't know why, but that hit me weird. Like it wasn't some random name or spooky ghost nonsense. It was more specific than that. It wanted us to ask about the future. Kyle, never one to back down from anything, grinned like an idiot. "All right, what does the future hold for us?" I expected the planchette to spell something vague or meaningless like danger or death, because that's usually how these things go, right? Some cliché warning that freaks you out, but you laugh it off later. But that's not what happened. Instead, it moved to the numbers, specifically a date. 2-4-0-8-2-4. "August 24th, 2024, Jess whispered, looking up at the rest of us. That's about 2 years from now, a super random date. But why would this Marie spirit want us to know about it? I laughed nervously, trying to shake off the weird vibe. What's supposed to happen on that day? The planchette moved to a single word. "See." "See what?" Kyle asked, this time sounding a little less sure of himself. The planchette didn't move for a while. We all sat there in total silence, waiting. You could hear the hum of Kyle's fridge in the kitchen, and the occasional car passing by outside. But nothing else. No movement. No answers. Just a board in the middle of the table, surrounded by 4 idiots who were suddenly way more sober than before. Jess broke the silence, pulling her fingers away from the planchette. "All right, I'm done. This is creeping me out." I wanted to act like it was no big deal, that it was all just some dumb game. But if I'm being honest, I was glad she stopped. Something about the way the board felt in that moment. I don't know, man. It wasn't right. We packed up the board, threw on some random movie to lighten the mood, and that was that. Or at least, we thought it was. Looking back, I wish we had never touched that thing. Because what came after, well, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. I'm telling you, it wasn't just a game. I thought that would be the end of it. I really did. We packed the Ouija board away, finished the night with some dumb comedy movie, and everyone went home like nothing happened. It was just a random date after all. August 24th, 2024. We laughed it off as one of those weird moments where our brains fill in the blanks, right? Except things started getting weird after that night. Not like, oh no, I saw a ghost in the mirror kind of weird, but subtle stuff. Little things that you don't really notice until they start piling up. The kind of stuff that makes you question whether you're imagining things, or if something's really going on. It started with my phone. I was at home the next day, just doing normal weekend stuff, laundry, dishes, whatever, when I noticed it. My phone kept resetting the time. Not by much, just a few seconds every now and then. Like, I'd glance at the clock and see it was 2:45 p.m. Then a minute later, it had jumped back to 2:44. I didn't think much of it at first, just assumed my phone was glitching or something, but it kept happening, all day long. Then, later that night, I went to set my alarm before bed. You know how when you open the clock app, you can scroll through different times to set it? Well, I went to set it for my usual time, and I swear the date jumped. Like for a split second, the screen showed August 24th, 2024. I froze, stared at the screen, waiting for it to happen again, but it didn't. It switched back to the regular date, no problem. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it, that maybe my brain was playing tricks on me after what happened with the Ouija board. But still, I didn't sleep well that night. A couple of days went by, and I tried not to think about it. Life went back to normal, or at least I thought it did. I hadn't talked to Jess, Kyle, or Alex since that night. It wasn't weird or anything. We all had our own lives and didn't hang out every day. But when Jess texted me out of nowhere, asking if I'd experienced anything strange since the Ouija board night, my stomach dropped. She didn't have to say much before I knew what she meant. She told me she'd been seeing the date pop up randomly too. Her computer calendar, the microwave clock, even on a billboard she swore changed when she glanced at it in traffic, just for a second, but enough to make her question if it was real. I didn't want to freak her out, so I played it cool. I told her it was probably just our brains being weird, that we were hyper aware of the date because of that stupid game. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. It was too specific, too deliberate. A week went by, and things started to escalate. The night before it all got really bad, I had this dream. You ever have a dream that feels so real, like you can smell the air and feel the ground under your feet? Yeah, it was like that. In the dream, I was standing in the middle of a street. It was empty, no cars, no people, just this eerie, heavy silence. Everything felt wrong, like the world was just slightly off kilter. The sky was a weird shade of grey, not cloudy, but like the colour was drained out of it. There was this buzzing sound in the air too, like distant electricity or something humming, but I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. And then I looked up. Down the street, there was this huge digital clock, one of those old school ones like from the 90s, attached to a building. It was counting down. 208, 207, 206. The numbers kept ticking down, and I felt this overwhelming sense of dread, like whatever was going to happen when that clock hit 0 was something I didn't want to be around for. I tried to run, but my feet felt like they were glued to the pavement. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. The numbers just kept falling. When I woke up, I was drenched in sweat. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I had this tight, panicked feeling in my throat, like I'd just narrowly escaped something. I grabbed my phone to check the time, 3:24 a.m. But right as I locked the screen, for a split second, I saw it again. August 24th, 2024. I didn't go back to sleep that night. The next morning, I got a text from Alex. I hadn't heard from him since that night at Kyle's, but his message was short and to the point. Have you guys been seeing it too? That's when I knew something was really off. I called him, and right away I could tell he was freaked out. Alex is the laid-back type. Nothing phases him, but his voice was shaky. He told me he'd been waking up every night at the same time, 3:24 a.m., and every single time, his phone would flash the date for a moment before switching back to normal. It wasn't just him. He said his mum had noticed him acting weird, so he told her about the Ouija board. She freaked out, said it was bad luck to play with those things, but the part that really got to me was what happened after. She asked him to show her the board, to see if maybe it had some kind of marking or something to explain it. When he went to get it from his closet, it was gone, like completely gone. He turned his room upside down, checked everywhere, but it was like the board had just vanished. I told him to meet up with me and Jess at Kyle's place, because we needed to figure out what the hell was going on, but none of us were ready for what we found when we got there. When we showed up at Kyle's place, it was around 5 p.m. The sun was starting to set, casting this weird orange glow over everything, like the world was slowly dipping into some surreal twilight zone. It's strange how the atmosphere can mess with your mind, make you feel like something's off before you even realize it. Jess, Alex and I stood outside Kyle's front door, waiting for him to answer. We had all texted him before heading over, but none of us had heard anything back. I figured he was probably just busy or something, but after what had been happening, my mind was racing with worst-case scenarios. After what felt like forever, Jess knocked again, harder this time. "Kyle, come on, open up," she called, her voice sharp with tension. I could see her trying to keep it together, but there was a tremor in her voice that wasn't there before. Alex was pacing a little, looking over his shoulder every few seconds like he was expecting something to jump out of the shadows. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Screw this," I muttered and twisted the doorknob. To my surprise, it was unlocked. I pushed the door open slowly, half expecting Kyle to jump out and scare the crap out of us, like he used to do when we were kids. But the house was silent. No TV, no music, no voices. Just that same humming buzz I'd been hearing in my dreams. "Kyle!" I called out, stepping inside. Jess and Alex followed behind me, their footsteps soft on the hardwood floor. The living room was exactly like we left it that night with the Ouija board. The same movies were scattered on the coffee table, a half-eaten bag of chips sitting next to them. It was almost like time had frozen in the house since we were last there. But Kyle was nowhere to be seen. "Kyle, man, this isn't funny," Alex said, his voice shaky. "Where are you?" We checked the kitchen, the bathroom, the bedrooms. Nothing. It was like he had just disappeared. His car was still in the driveway, his shoes by the front door, but he was gone. And the thing that really freaked me out? His phone was sitting on the kitchen counter. The screen was lit up, and I could see he had several missed calls and texts, probably from us. "Kyle wouldn't just leave without his phone," Jess whispered, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. I could see she was trying to rationalize it, but we all knew it didn't make sense. Something wasn't right. We gathered in the living room, trying to figure out what to do next. The air in the house felt thick, heavy. It was the same feeling I had in that dream, like something was building, like we were on the edge of something bad. Then, Jess noticed it first. "Wait, where's the Ouija board?" She pointed at the coffee table, where the board had been the night we used it. I swear to you, we had left it there when we packed up. None of us had touched it. But now, just like at Alex's house, it was gone. "Okay, no, this is too much," Alex said, backing away from the table, like the absence of the board itself was some kind of threat. His face had gone pale, and I could tell he was on the verge of panic. "Kyle must have moved it," I said, though even I didn't believe that. Why would he move it and then just disappear? Before any of us could say anything else, we heard it. A faint sound coming from the hallway. It was this soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone was knocking lightly on wood. We all froze, exchanging glances. I slowly made my way down the hall, Jess and Alex right behind me. The sound was coming from Kyle's bedroom, the one we'd already checked. The door was cracked open just a bit, and I swear I could feel my heart pounding in my throat. I pushed the door open, and we all stepped inside. At first, I didn't see anything. The room was empty, just like before. But then, I looked closer, and I saw it. The closet door was slightly ajar, and the tapping was coming from inside. I swallowed hard and motioned for Jess and Alex to stay back. I know, it was probably stupid to go in, but I couldn't just ignore it. I stepped closer to the closet, my hands shaking as I reached for the handle. "Ben, don't," Jess whispered, but it was too late. I yanked the closet door open. Inside was the Ouija board, propped up against the wall. But that wasn't the worst part. The planchette was moving, on its own. I don't know how to explain it. It wasn't subtle, like someone had barely touched it. No, this thing was sliding across the board as if being pushed by some invisible hand, faster than I'd ever seen it move when we were using it, and it was spelling something. Jess let out a strangled gasp as we watched the letters form. L-O-O-K. Look. It was telling us to look. But at what? Then, just as suddenly as it started, the planchette stopped. The room was dead silent again, except for the sound of our breathing. We stood there for what felt like forever, staring at the board, waiting for something else to happen, but nothing did. "We need to get out of here," Alex whispered, his voice barely audible. I couldn't argue with him. The house felt wrong, like it was pressing in on us, suffocating. We backed out of Kyle's room and made our way down the hall, trying to stay calm, trying to act like we weren't about to lose it. But just as we reached the living room, the lights went out. Complete darkness. Jess screamed, and I fumbled for my phone, trying to turn on the flashlight. My hands were shaking so bad it took me a few tries. But when I finally got it on, I swept the light around the room. "Kyle!" I yelled, hoping he was just playing some kind of sick prank on us. No answer. "Guys, we need to leave. Now," Alex said, already making his way toward the front door. We followed, not needing to be told twice. We rushed outside, slamming the door behind us, and for a second, the cold air felt like a relief. But when I looked back at the house, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Through the living room window, there was a figure, just standing there in the dark, watching us. It wasn't Kyle. I couldn't move. None of us could. We just stood there on Kyle's front lawn, staring through the window. The figure inside wasn't moving, wasn't doing anything but standing there, as if it had been watching us the whole time. My brain was racing, trying to make sense of it. Was it Kyle? Was it some kind of trick? But deep down, I knew it wasn't Kyle. This thing felt wrong. The air around it seemed darker, thicker, like it was sucking the light out of the room. "What the hell is that?" Jess whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind that had suddenly picked up. None of us answered. I don't think any of us knew how to. We were all thinking the same thing, though. "We need to leave, now." Alex was the first to snap out of it. He grabbed my arm and started pulling me toward his car. "We can't stay here. Ben, come on." I wanted to argue, to say something, but my legs were moving before my brain could catch up. Jess was already ahead of us, practically sprinting to the car. We piled in, and Alex fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so badly he could barely get them in the ignition. "Just drive," Jess shouted, her voice breaking. She was looking back at the house, her eyes wide with fear. I didn't want to look back. I didn't want to see if that figure was still there, watching us, waiting for something. The engine roared to life, and Alex slammed his foot on the gas, peeling out of Kyle's driveway so fast the tires squealed. None of us said anything for a while. The tension in the car so thick it felt like we couldn't breathe. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the pounding of my own heartbeat in my ears. After a few minutes, Alex finally spoke. What the hell was that? His voice was low, almost like he didn't want to know the answer. I don't know, I admitted, but it wasn't Kyle. Jess was sitting in the back seat, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. We need to go to the cops. We need to tell them Kyle's missing. I nodded. It was the only thing that made sense at that point. Kyle had vanished, and now there was some thing in his house. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew we couldn't handle it on our own. We needed help. But just as Alex turned onto the main road, something strange happened. Jess's phone lit up, and she stared at it in confusion. "It's Kyle," she said, her voice trembling. "What?" I whipped around to look at her, my heart skipping a beat. "Kyle's calling." Jess nodded, but her face had gone pale. "No, not calling. He just sent me a text." She held up her phone so we could see the screen. There was a message from Kyle's number, but it wasn't the kind of message you'd expect from someone who'd gone missing. It was just one word. "Look." "Look at what?" Alex muttered, glancing at the road ahead. I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. The Ouija board. It had spelled out the same word earlier. "Jess, text him back," I said. "Ask him where he is." Jess's fingers were shaking as she typed, and for a few tense seconds, we waited. Every second felt like it stretched into an eternity, and I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see that figure standing in the road behind us. Then, Jess's phone buzzed again. We all leaned in to see the new message, and what we saw made my blood run cold. 2:08, 2:07, 2:06. It was counting down, just like the clock in my dream. "That's not Kyle," I whispered, my throat dry. Jess's eyes filled with tears. "What does it mean? What happens when it hits 0? I didn't have an answer for her. All I knew was that we were running out of time. My mind flashed back to the Ouija board, to that date, August 24th, 2024. It was like everything was leading up to something none of us could stop. "Drive faster," I told Alex, my voice more urgent now. He didn't need to be told twice. The car sped up, the world outside blurring past as we headed toward town. But no matter how fast we went, the sense of dread followed us, like something unseen was keeping pace, waiting for its moment. We pulled into the police station's parking lot about 10 minutes later, the sun now fully set. The building looked normal, reassuring even, and for a moment I thought maybe we'd get some answers, some kind of help. But as we got out of the car and started toward the entrance, Jess's phone buzzed again. We all froze. Slowly, Jess lifted her phone to check the message. Her hands were shaking so badly, I could hear the phone rattling. She stared at the screen for a moment, her face going pale. "It's Kyle again," she whispered. "He sent a photo." "A photo?" I took a step closer to her, trying to see the screen. She showed us the picture, and my stomach turned. It was a photo of us, all three of us, standing in front of the police station. It had been taken just moments ago, from somewhere close by. Something was watching us. Jess dropped her phone, and I could see the fear in her eyes. How did they take that? How did they send it?" Alex didn't say anything. His face was tight, his knuckles white as he clenched his fists. "We need to get inside." We rushed toward the station, hearts pounding, practically shoving our way through the door. The fluorescent lights inside felt cold, clinical, safe, but in the way a hospital does. Disconnected from whatever horror lurked outside. The officer at the front desk raised an eyebrow as we stumbled in, looking like we'd just seen a ghost. "Can I help you?" I stepped forward, my voice shaky. "Our friend is missing. We need to report a disappearance." The officer nodded, pulling out a form. "All right, let's start with his name and last known..." Before he could finish, the lights in the station flickered. I didn't think much of it at first. Lights flicker sometimes, right? But then Jess's phone buzzed again, and again, and again. She didn't want to look, none of us did, but when she finally picked it up, her face went ashen. She turned the phone toward me and Alex, and my heart nearly stopped. It's too late. Before I could process it, the lights in the station went out completely, plunging us into darkness. And in that moment, I heard it again. That same buzzing sound I'd heard in my dreams, getting louder, closer, like something was surrounding us, something we couldn't see. The countdown had reached 0. The darkness in the police station was suffocating. It wasn't the kind of darkness you're used to, like when you're in your room at night and your eyes adjust. This was deeper, heavier, like something was pressing down on us, the kind that makes you feel like you're not alone. The only sound was Jess's sharp breathing and the faint electrical hum that had been following us since Kyle disappeared. "Stay calm," the officer at the desk said, though I could tell by his voice that he was just as freaked out as we were. He fumbled for a flashlight, its weak beam flickering to life, barely cutting through the thick blackness. But then we heard something. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoing through the station, coming from somewhere down the hall. Alex turned toward the sound, his eyes wide, but he didn't say anything. We didn't need to. We all knew something was coming. "Hello?" the officer called out, shining his flashlight down the hallway. No answer. Just the steady thud of footsteps getting closer. The air felt heavy, like we were standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting to be pushed. Jess gripped my arm so hard it hurt. "Ben!" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Something's coming." "I know," I muttered, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps stopped, dead silence. The officer's flashlight flickered again, like it was struggling to stay on. And for a second, we saw it. A figure. Tall, shadowy, standing at the end of the hallway. It didn't move. It just stood there, as if watching us, like it had been the whole time. I couldn't see its face, if it even had one, but I could feel its eyes on us, cold, calculating, waiting. And then it began walking toward us. "Back up!" the officer barked, his voice rising in panic. "Get back!" But there was nowhere to go. We were backed up against the front desk, the only exit blocked by whatever this thing was. The flashlight flickered again, and I felt a cold chill run down my spine as the lights buzzed back to life for just a moment, casting a pale glow over the station. In that brief flash of light, I saw it clearly. It wasn't Kyle. It wasn't human. It was something else entirely. Its body was elongated, almost stretched, its limbs too long, its movements too fluid. It was like watching something try to mimic a person, but getting all the details wrong. And then its face, or what was left of it, turned toward us. No eyes, no mouth, just a featureless void where its face should have been. But still, I felt it staring at me. "Run!" Alex shouted, breaking the spell of terror that had kept us frozen in place. He grabbed Jess's hand, yanking her toward the side door that led into the parking lot. I followed, my legs moving before my brain could catch up. The officer fumbled with his gun, but before he could even raise it, the thing was on him. We didn't stop to see what happened. The sound of the officer's scream was enough. We bolted for the door, crashing through it into the cold night air, the darkness outside somehow feeling safer than what we had just left behind. Alex's car was parked a few feet away, and we sprinted toward it, gasping for breath, our hearts hammering in our chests. Jess fumbled with the door handle, tears streaming down her face. "Get in! Get in! Get in!" she cried, her voice cracking. I yanked open the passenger door, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the keys I'd swiped from Alex's pocket. "Start it! Start the car!" Alex was in the driver's seat, but his hands were frozen on the steering wheel. His eyes were wide, staring at something in the rearview mirror. "It's here," he whispered. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see it again. But I couldn't stop myself. Slowly, I turned, and through the back window, I saw it. Standing in the middle of the parking lot, illuminated by the dim streetlights, was the figure. It wasn't moving this time. It was just watching us, waiting. But there was something different now. Its face, that blank, featureless void, it was changing. Slowly, like wax melting, it started to form features. And those features, it was Kyle's face. "Kyle!" Jess sobbed, her voice barely a whisper. It's using him. No, that's not Kyle." I said, my voice trembling. That's not him. Alex finally snapped out of it and slammed the car into gear, peeling out of the parking lot so fast I was sure we'd crash. We sped through the empty streets, the streetlights flickering as we passed. Like the whole world was glitching around us. Jess was crying in the back seat, clutching her phone. Why is this happening? What did we do? I didn't have an answer for her. None of us did. For a while, we drove in silence, the tension thick enough to choke on. I kept glancing at the clock on the dashboard, half expecting it to flash the date again. But it didn't. After what felt like an eternity, we pulled into a gas station. It was the first sign of life we'd seen in miles. And even though it was just an old, run-down place with flickering neon lights, it felt like a lifeline. We stumbled out of the car, shaking, trying to catch our breath. The clerk inside the gas station gave us a weird look as we staggered in, but I didn't care. I just needed to be somewhere bright, somewhere that felt normal. Jess collapsed onto a bench near the door, her head in her hands. "What now?" she whispered. "Where do we go?" Alex looked at me, his face pale. What was that thing? And why was it using Kyle's face? I didn't know. I had no answers, but I knew one thing for sure. The date, August 24th, 2024, wasn't just some random day. It wasn't just something the Ouija board had thrown out to scare us. It was counting down to something. And now, with the countdown at 0, whatever was happening had already begun. I didn't know what would happen next. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Something was coming. Something bigger than the four of us. Bigger than a missing friend or a haunted board. And it was only a matter of time before it caught up to us. We shouldn't have asked about the future. We weren't supposed to know.